Good evening and welcome to Perspective. We will be talking about mental health care ordinance, some criticisms that it has been facing, the loopholes that can be plugged, also the Sindh mental health bill 2012, and also the kind of issues that the mentally ill face and whether we have the means to handle them. Thank you so much for being with us, and I have with me Barrister Masroor Shah. He is the Senior Advocate, Supreme Court. Thank you for joining me.
Pleasure.
And Dr. Safi, who is the Director, Programs, Ministry of National Health Services. Thank you so much for being with us today. Is it true that, to start with you, Dr. Safi, is it true that mental health issues are actually, problems are actually more common than diseases like even cancer and heart diseases?
Thank you for inviting us for this very important meeting. And the issue which has been pointed out, the mental health issues in our country, basically this has remained as a neglected area before, and across the globe and within Pakistan, mental health issues are now on the increase. If we see the disease burden, so one of the mental health issues, that is depression, it's number 2 in the ranking after the CVDs, that is the cerebrovascular diseases, heart disease, simply to say. So depression ranks at number 2.
Right.
So
mental illnesses are clearly
on the rise, and a big issue in our country and across the globe.
Right. Doctor, and I'll come back to you with that. Barrister Saab, yes, it's a huge issue. Yes, it's very common. Let's go into the legislation. What kind of a legislative framework do we have at present?
Actually, as far as law is concerned, various aspects of mental health as far as they pertain to criminal justice system or the civil justice system, they have already been in place in the major laws of Pakistan. For example, when dealing with criminal justice system, the Criminal Procedure Code has various provisions which deal with, it's not appropriate to use the word lunatic, but that is the word that was used in our very old legislation, like Pakistan Penal Code was inculcated in 1898, so naturally nowadays we use different words for these people. Similarly, Civil Procedure Code also have certain special provisions which deals with people with mental challenges or with certain disabilities. Law has given them various relaxations, various privileges, various rights. But if you're talking about a comprehensive single statute that comprehensively deals with all aspects, because the criminal law or the civil law only deals with a mentally challenged person if it has any concern with the courts. But otherwise, as far as the treatment is concerned, if they are wandering around in public areas, or the regulation of the psychiatric facilities are concerned, that I guess it was lacking. But now that the federal government has passed this Act of Parliament, which I guess has been adopted by Sindh and by Punjab, I guess.
But I understand it's not, it hasn't yet become law in Punjab, because this is largely a provincial subject.
The social after 18th Amendment, these issues have been devolved upon the provinces. Now the federal government can come up with a model law with a framework which is then the totally the will of the provinces. To what extent do they adopt? There is no constitutional requirement to ditto copy the same. They may delete certain clauses, they may add certain clauses, they may or they may not adopt this legislation. This is just a specimen, and they can come up with something totally out of their own vision, and they can inculcate various other provisions in the law.
We'll come back to the law legal side again in a bit. Dr. Safi, the ostracism that people who are mentally ill face is very real in our society in particular. How do you as a professional, medical professional, how do you see that as being dealt with in our society, particularly in the medical profession?
You mean basically the management of psychiatric illnesses and their treatment and how to take care about them. So basically, at the moment, at the current status, you will be surprised to know that we have only 800 psychiatrists all across the country, and 800 and 700 clinical psychologists. So the Institute of Psychiatry, they are attached with the teaching hospitals, so there are very limited facilities where there is access to. We are around 180 million population.
Right.
So having an access to quality care and for psychiatric illnesses, that is a huge issue.
But when we talk about clinical psychologists and clinical psychiatrists and psychologists, the division is is that between whether you can be medically, you can prescribe medicines and counseling, is that the difference to a lay person?
Yeah. The psychiatrists, they can assess and they can then prescribe, and clinical psychologists, they usually counsel the patients.
But why is there such a dearth of all kinds of psychologists? Like you said, there are only 800, but particularly with regard to psychologists and not psychiatrists, why is that? Is it not as rewarding, or why is that?
Basically, the country or the provinces should have a human resource development policy in which they should have, based on the disease burden, and they should project their requirement for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and according to that they should develop institutions and training institution where such people could come over and get training, and then opportunities should be provided where they could be selected or they could perform their functions. In Pakistan at the moment, around 80% there is a treatment gap, which we call the patient which are present and the patient which have an access to care. It's a treatment gap of 80%.
Right.
So that's a huge gap which can be managed. So that's why this issue is all across the globe. So WHO.
It's not just particular to Pakistan.
No, it's all across the globe, and in this background, World Health Organization, they have come up with the global mental health global action plan, in which they have recommended to member states to manage such illnesses, identify such illnesses through the primary health care systems.
Right.
So in that case, the access of such patients, that would become easy, and that would be manageable.
Right.
So this is the only solution at the present moment.
Right. Barrister Sahab, you mentioned that we don't have particularly one law, but there are provisions in different pieces of legislation. But what legal checks, safeguards are currently there in the law for protection of such mentally impaired people? Because as I was going through the history, in England, for example, and in other areas, there was it was open to abuse. For example, men were relegated their first wives to these mental, I think they were called madhouses at that time, to marry again, and that's just one of the ways in which it was abused. How is it presently that they are safeguarded to such abuse, even by their family members or even by the society?
You see, the courts act as locus parentis in respect of all the citizens of the country.
No.
By locus parentis, in a layman's term, we can say that they act as guardians, natural guardian, or the parents. Right? Just like a parent would protect a child, similarly the courts protect the vulnerable segments of the society.
Right.
Whether they are children, whether they are women, whether they are people who are mentally challenged. So every court, every justice of peace, and every district and session judge, and every magistrate has inherent power to act as locus parentis and to protect them.
Right.
Now, even on an application, if a ordinary citizen sees that a mentally challenged person is being abused, even within the four walls of his house, he can make an application to the session judge, and then he can pass an appropriate order.
Right.
So that thing is very much there. But as far as a comprehensive legislation, you see, because in order to give adequate protection, I think apart from law, what we need to do is to change the attitude of the society as well. Because we have seen, I mean, if the past is of any guide, we have seen people with physical challenges, with mental challenges, and they have played a very pivotal role in their respective societies.
Right.
Recently, Olympics for physically challenged persons was held, and we have seen people winning races even without the legs. So what we need to do is to change the attitude of the society, because law again is limited. Law can only regulate the things where abuse is there, but as far as making them pivotal section of the society and making use of their talents, because if God does not give one particular aspect of, for example, legs to a person or the sight to the person, it compensates with another facility. So perhaps they might have certain qualities, but we need to do is, as a society, we need to explore them, we need to give them a platform where they can use their talent to the maximum potential.
Dr. Safi, like Barrister Saab has just mentioned, that there are it's also important, along with the legislation, along with the legal safeguards, it's important to sensitize the society. As a doctor, what kind of issues do you see most often with mentally impaired people, the society's reaction to them? I mean, of course they need safeguards in legislation, but how do we safeguard the reaction of society? How do we safeguard them from those issues?
I think in this context, there should be a very comprehensive communication strategy in order to assess why society is doing so, and accordingly right sort of messages should to educate the community at large should be given, and they, instead of giving names to, they should be labeled as special patient or special
but we keep hearing that you know, as a society, as a country, we face a lot of issues with regard to being an underdeveloped country, and we have healthcare issues. We have healthcare issues even with regard to primary healthcare, and you know, that's a fact also. How do then we go towards this sector? How do we then provide so much protection in a sector like psychiatric, where people have psychiatric issues, when they say we can't even deal with primary care?
As I previously mentioned, that globally, and now it is also being taken up by the provincial health departments as a policy matter, that we will be managing the psychiatric illnesses. They have prioritized 6 to 7 illnesses, including the child psychiatric problems, to the primary health care. And even in Punjab, Government of Health, as they have approved the PC1 allocating resources to initiate this project, implementation of this project. So after devolution, more resources are going into the health sector by the provincial governments, and we are also recommending the provincial governments that mental health should be given more priority, and the referral linkages, so that primary health care should refer the serious cases to the higher centers or the tertiary care where they are managed. Otherwise, now the new theme is that patients should be managed at their community level, within their home environment, so they are better management.
I want to know a little more about how that will work. Let me first come to Barrister Saab. It's the criminal. Like we were talking about the society's reaction and the ongoing discussion on that. The criminal. There were instances when our criminal justice system has penalized mentally impaired people for offences such as blasphemy.
Yes, that's very unfortunate. But before I dilate upon the criminal justice system aspect of the mentally challenged people, I would like to supplement the answer given by Dr. Saab.
Of course.
You see, unfortunately, I mean, treating the psychiatric patients, the mentally challenged persons, is a separate thing altogether. What to talk of allocation of resources, etc., we as a society don't consider it as a disease.
Right.
Most of the people, not even in the rural area, even in the urban areas, when they see a child who is mentally challenged, they don't take them to the doctor. And Dr. Saab would endorse me. that they take them to fake spiritual healers, they take them to peers and all those people where their situation gets deteriorated, or sometimes they just leave them at the shrines, say that they are communicating with the god or something, may make all these theories. So firstly we need to realize that this is a disease just like a heart disease, just like a eyesight disease, just like any other disease.
Epilepsy, for example, is I think one of these diseases.
And once we realize, we appreciate the existence of the problem, only then we can then propose the lacunas and the remedies. So that is the aspect which needs to be worked on. Now coming to the criminal justice system, yes, our courts are not as sensitive to the mentally challenged people as they are supposed to be, and conviction is done at a very later stage. Even in the course of investigation, the investigation officer in the police station, he needs to be sensitized that whether the person you are charging, whether the person you are interrogating, whether he or she is in a capacity to understand the questions, understand the nature of offense, and then can he or she respond accordingly or not.
But they would need particularly, I mean, they would need specially trained people for
Capacity is a big issue.
Right.
I mean, they can't interrogate sorry to interrupt
I'll
you.
come back
They
to you.
can't interrogate a normal, healthy human being. What to talk of dealing with the mentally challenged people?
Right, and I want to come back to you on this. Dr. Saab, is it true that in a scenario like that, a doctor would have to be present, or there's no such requirement?
No, there is no such requirement, but usually the cases are referred to the psychiatric specialist, the public health psychiatrist, through the courts to assess the patients and submit a report regarding his or her status about the mental health condition. Because there are cases maybe due to inheritance, there are inheritance issues, there are murder cases which the murderer claims that he is not well and he should be assessed. So in that case they are referred to Institute of Psychiatry at the tertiary case, where they are assessed, retained and assessed, and then reported back to the court for further.
Barrister Masroor, those issues relating to inheritance relate to capacity again, and then the issue, what about when you are a small child and you're impaired, when you have the when you're mentally impaired? How does the law deal with inheritance in that case, and how does the law deal with like I mentioned, the offences like blasphemy, which are very sensitive? How does the law deal with a mentally impaired person under the ordinance and under the different pieces of legislation?
As far as inheritance issues are concerned, the court can appoint a sane, responsible person as the guardian. And the only criteria that law lays down and enunciates for that is the welfare of that person. So the court, under its own scrutiny, can appoint a uncle or aunt or father or mother or any responsible person, or even I have seen instances even a third person, a person who might not even be related. In some instances, even distant relatives have been appointed. The only thing is the court has to ensure that the interest of that person is taken care of, and he enjoys the right of inheritance. As far as then the issue of investigation and criminal justice system is concerned, that again I said that the problem is that at the police station level, I mean, the evidence that would be recorded, that has to be viewed from the right perspective, because an evidence given by a sane, healthy person would be very different to the one given by a mentally challenged person. And then there are degrees. You see, a person need not to be totally out of sync, out of mind, to be declared as a mentally challenged person.
But then that would depend on the doctor or the medical health professional.
For example, dyslexia. Now, dyslexia is a medical condition where a person might appear very normal, just like you and me, but he or she does not have that capacity to retain and memorize. Especially when I was studying in a university in UK, we had a special examination room for dyslexic students, where So instead of 3 hours given to a normal student, they were given 6 hours.
6 hours.
So these are the things that on the face of it, the person might be appearing very normal, but they have a medical condition. Perhaps the government needs to ensure that these things should be defined properly. These things are technical things. I think experts like Dr. Saab, they need to put forth this case, because a judge is a student of law. He does not, or a lawyer or a police officer, they don't have capacity. I mean, there are so many new things that I am learning today. So the thing is that these things need to be properly defined, and proper code should be enunciated whereby technical experts be allowed to assess and give their expert opinion, and then once that opinion is there, then the court can decide in accordance with
But Dr. Saab, do you see that liaison being effective between professionals such as yourself in cases, in scenarios where mentally impaired people are before the law, or you think that there is no such liaison when expert opinion is required in those cases?
I think referring to the previous discussion, the ordinance or the laws, they have to be there at national level for the federal territories, and similarly at the provincial level, so that the law would give protection to patients as well as to the healthcare provider, the jail authorities, the mental health institution. That law would support and would be of assistance in case any untoward accident happens. So in that legal aspect, it would cover under that there has to have a mental health authority in all the 4 provinces.
And the Mental Health Bill 2012, that is in particular, that was all across the board, professionals were taken into account and their opinion was taken into account. How do you see that as an effective piece of legislation?
You see, the problem with Pakistan is that we already have plethora of statutes on our statute book. The only thing is how well it is implemented. We have juvenile justice ordinance as well, but we are all witness to the state of affairs of our juveniles. The only thing is that the government should allocate adequate resources, and there should be a political will to translate those lofty ideals enunciated in the statute into reality. And once we start seeing that on the ground, then definitely I'll be the first one to appreciate.
But the legislature, when it makes laws, it's obviously showing a will of the government, and we've seen that, and you said that there are a lot of laws. As far as implementation is concerned, professionals, what role can professionals like yourself, what role can psychiatric doctors play?
Basically, under this law, each province has to constitute a mental health authority, and that includes eminent psychiatrists as its members. So almost half of the membership is with the psychiatrists, professionals. So
the law itself envisages a partnership between the professionals and between the enforcement.
So they are there to advise how should be the treatment guidelines, what should be the criteria for assessing various cases, whom to detain when he or she has a certain problem. Unless this is implemented, that's why I was referring to protection of doctors themselves under this legislation. If this is implemented in letter and spirit, so that would protect both the patients as well as the professionals. And currently the Punjab Healthcare Commission is there, in Sindh and in KP Healthcare Commission Acts are there. They are there to ensure the quality care issues within the province, in both in public and private sector. But mental health Act should be adopted and implemented across the board in each of the provinces in order to ensure safety of patient and safety of the professionals as well. And similarly, safety of security and authorities as well as jail authorities. So that is it.
But Barrister Sahab, what kind of issues do you see with the criminal justice system when a juvenile who's mentally impaired is at the barrel of it?
No, there are two different persons we're talking about. For juvenile, we have a different set of regulations. They're not supposed to be locked up in a normal men's prison or women's prison. There is a separate cell or separate place designated for juveniles.
Even within the mentally impaired, there is a division.
Yes. And then, as far as the mentally impaired persons are concerned, I think it depends on the degree or the severity or the gravity of the illness. Because if they are too ill, then under the law they are innocent. Even if they commit murder, they cannot be found guilty for that offence. There are other consequences, of course, that would follow. But as far as the guilt is concerned, they would be absolved of their charges, because in order to commit an offence, there should be two factors. They must coincide: the actus reus and mens rea, the act and the guilty thought. Right?
Does
the
that
intention.
also apply to offences like blasphemy?
Definitely. I mean, if it depends. You see that if the person does not intend to commit blasphemy, how can you then find him guilty?
Right.
Blasphemy is a different thing altogether. I mean, even the sane people, they've been found guilty. There are other aspects. The religious sentiments get infuriated.
And I think that's perhaps not as relevant, but
exactly.
Right.
But even in other cases, I mean, in murder cases, there are so many people who are behind the bars who are mentally not well. So definitely, like there's a concept of battered woman syndrome. A woman who has been, say, battered and tortured and abused by a husband for the last 20 years. One fine morning she wakes up and in sheer emotions and being overwhelmed by the torture and torment,
Right.
she kills her husband. That murder is different to a cold-blooded, premeditated murder. So
Right.
these are the aspects which have to be taken into account. And for that, not only the letter of law, but the attitude of the judges. Because the judges also, especially the trial judges, they also come from the same society that we live in. Right?
So they have to be
sensitized. These things have to be sensitized, and they should be able to appreciate. And once that sensitization is there,
Right.
then they will be able to appreciate the evidence on record from that perspective, from that lens. And I think then we will see some positive changes on the ground.
Right. As a professional, and we've already talked about the fact that this is a big issue, and there are only about 800 you're saying that medical professionals to deal with the issue. As what kind of an attitude do you see within the family? It's also one of those taboo diseases within the family also. So obviously professionals and then the criminal justice system comes in, but that's at a later stage. How often do you encounter that in our society? That's a very real issue also. I mean, how often do we take somebody to a psychiatrist when we feel they're going through a mental problem?
Basically, the patient with living in a family, so that family also is in a very big trouble in order to manage such a difficult person who is not in control of himself. And if he or she is not able to manage herself or himself, so it's a big taboo. Most of our population is living in rural areas. They don't have access, as pointed out to Barrister's previous remarks, that the first point of contact usually are the peers, fakirs, and within the community, and the case is also not referred by them to proper clinical people in order to manage that. So there's a big issue of taboo around those families as well, and about the patients.
Right.
So this needs to be.
So it's when we talk about sensitizing, like Barrister Saab mentioned, we need to not just sensitize, professionals and the judges. That's obviously important, but also the society
Community
as a
at
general,
large.
the family themselves.
Yeah,
that's also very important
very essential.
for somebody suffering
Definitely.
with this disease. Thank you so much for joining me today. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Barrister Saab, Dr. Safi Saab, thank you for giving us your valuable time. Clearly, the issue of mental health is an important issue with just about 800 professionals for such a huge population. It's an issue that has to take the front. It's an issue that we all need to deal with as a society. But when we talk about legislation, we talk about different pieces of legislation, the criminal justice system, what it boils down to is that we need to sensitize our society as a whole, not just the criminal justice system, not just the judges, not just the professionals, but also the society, which we need to know how to deal with such issues. We need to know how to deal with such troubled individuals, and that's the most important thing. Thank you so much for joining me today on Perspective.